Thank you, Bruce, and good morning, everyone. I'm Trudy Coxe, and today we go inside the Newport Mansions with one of our own, Preservation Society Director of Museum Affairs and Chief Curator, Leslie Jones. This is a department at the Preservation Society that encompasses a huge range of duties and responsibilities, including the staging of exhibitions. And right now, Leslie and her team are in the process of overseeing final preparations for the launch of our new exhibition, Richard Morris Hunt in a New Light, which opens to the public on May 30th at Rosecliff. And everybody in Newport is a member of the Preservation Society, so you have the opportunity to come for free. And we hope you will join us. So Leslie is here today, and I want to welcome her and start out with a very broad question, Leslie, and that is, who is Richard Morris Hunt and why is he important?
So Richard Morris Hunt is a famed architect, and we know that because we are lucky enough to have 3 buildings that his talent has touched. He was born in the early 19th century in Brattleboro, Vermont, to an incredible family that had generations instilled in the founding of our country. And he really took that patriotic duty to heart as he moved through his life. With the untimely death of his father, his mother moved the children, his siblings, away from Vermont, a few places in the US, but then eventually to Europe. And in a lot of ways, we see this as her direct idea of fostering their creativity. This was not something that was normal in terms of, parental development in the 19th century. So Jane Hunt was really a revolutionary individual in that respect. And Richard went on to briefly study architecture in Switzerland before twice having to take the entrance exam to be the first American accepted to the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. So let that be a lesson to anybody. If you first don't succeed, try again, because it happened for Richard Morris Hunt. He studied at the École, which is known primarily as one of the greatest areas for formal instruction in art and architecture in the 19th century across Europe and really then the world. And as a student there, he was assigned to the atelier or workshop of an architect, and that happened to be Hector Martin Lefluelle. He really won the lottery when it came to this. And Lefluelle was an architect to the Emperor Napoleon III, and he really trained Hunt in terms of how to apply great design to both civic commissions as well as private, residential commissions. He worked on, the Chateau de Fontainebleau and all sorts of other aristocratic private residences. So Hunt returns to America with a purpose after having this great training. And really,
how many years would it have been, Leslie?
So from what we know, he was there for about 10 years. School then sounds like it was a lot more fun because you didn't have to sit in classes all day. He did formal instruction, but he also traveled extensively. From what we know from his sketchbooks and his journals, he went to Algeria, to Egypt, to Palestine, to Jerusalem, to the fjords of Norway, all across Europe, and the Middle East and North Africa. So it was really an extraordinary experience for him. And luckily, he documented this in sketchbooks and scrapbooks. The art of scrapbooking, yes, it goes back to the 19th century. So all that's to say is it was a great framework, essentially influencing him to create these great buildings and instill a more formalized sense of culture in America after he returned from Europe. And we have him today as, leading in the development of these great structures in New York City, in Boston, in Newport particularly, and all of that is a result of these great influences. So,
and was his family, I didn't catch this, was it a well-off family or was it middle class?
Certainly well off for the period. Having been some of the earliest settlers of what's now known as Vermont and the Connecticut River Valley, they had huge tracts of land. They were able to delve into politics. And then he also married well, too. So Catherine Howland, who was his wife, they married in 1861. She was a shipping heiress. And Hunt, of course, came with his own. But I think his fortune skyrocketed through a great match. Not to mention architectural commission speaking, Hunt made a significant fortune as a part of his career.
And did he go to school before the École des Beaux-Arts here in America? Where was he before he went there?
Well, he was 18 when he entered the École, and
Oh,
around the age of 15 or 16 when they were still in the US. I think the concept, at least from what we understand research-wise, was that his mother hoped he would go to Harvard, but he was actually interested in going to West Point. But they
hmm.
picked up and moved. So he did have an education in the US, but he wasn't yet at an age where he was going to be in sort of more formal academic structured university situation. So he didn't do that in the US, but the École, while it's not a university, was certainly the equivalent of that when he went to Europe.
And he must have been quite gifted in language. I'm sure he spoke French fluently. He
Must
traveled to
have.
speak other languages as well.
Yes, as far as we know, French was primarily the only language he spoke, but English. We know that he wrote in it quite well too, and again, in terms of these great sketchbooks that document his travels, he makes annotations in French as well as in English.
He sounds like a really a Renaissance man in many ways.
I
Is,
think that title fits him perfectly.
is the
Absolutely.
École still around, and is it considered to be a place where good architects get their careers started?
Absolutely. It is still a very prominent organization and institution for people to study in sort of a formal structure for both the development of art and architectural practice. It started in the 18th century, so it's a very long-lasting institution. And in some cases, again, it doesn't, from an American standard, provide you with a university degree, but it is this supplemental education that adds to one's resume in a way that very few other places can.
And how easily would it have, what did the family have to do, or did Richard have to do to become the first American to be accepted into that program?
There is a series of examinations that you would have to move through in order to be accepted. And as I said earlier, he didn't make it through the first series. So I believe it's 1854 when he is going through the first round of exams in Paris, which are in French. And it's not just design and style, it's also structural engineering questionnaires and written examinations. And so while he didn't pass the first time around, he did pass the second time. And
Mhm.
I actually believe it may have been math that was his struggle area. So he must have brushed up on that a bit and then accepted the next year and began under Lefluel, this incredible architect that took him on and really nurtured him through this process.
It sounds like architecture today is not terribly different than architecture then, because now you are required to take 6 really difficult exams. And it is not uncommon for the student to fail at least one, and are not supposed to get discouraged if you have, but
Mhm.
it's a grueling exercise to go through, and it takes several years usually.
And we have Richard Morris Hunt to thank for that in the US because he
Aha,
does become the founding member of the American Institute of Architects in the 19th century.
aha.
And he brings also that École de Beaux-Arts structure to the US where it didn't exist before. I mean, if you think about his additions to Chateau sur Mer was built by a builder, not a trained architect. They were more apprenticeships, but not this formal examination of historical styles and precedents to build upon. They were more so just following instruction that they'd had along the way by mechanics rather than, really groundbreaking design. So,
Well, not unsimilar to Horace Trumbauer, who built without a, um, well, not the kind of architectural degree that one would get today.
right.
He really came out of the box on his own, having studied under good people and learning well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think all those unique stories of the 19th century of architects and professional designers sort of coming into their own are what created the structure that we have today. And it's also not only for the sake of good design and building, I think it also becomes a safety concern to make sure you know what you're doing so that these buildings last for as long as possible.
Absolutely, that's fundamental. Well,
Hmm.
the exhibit is about ready to open. You have a few weeks to go. The
Yeah.
30th is the drop dead date.
Yes, I
What
thank
makes
you for the
this
reminder.
what makes this exhibition? And by the way, for those listening, this is an exhibition space on the second floor of Rosecliff. The second floor has been completely revamped into exhibition space. Very, very pretty area. Several rooms and a hallway to fill. So this is not going to be a small show. This is a big show. And I'm very curious about what makes this show different from the many other shows that have featured the expertise and the genius of Richard Morris Hunt.
That's a really good question. And really what we're trying to examine as a part of this exhibition is who Hunt is, what drove him, where does the influence come from, and how can we find that through his personal belongings? We're bringing together for the first time materials from the Library of Congress, from the Bennington Museum of Art in Vermont, the Vermont Historical Society, where Hunt family papers of generations exist, and like I said, Library of Congress, where Hunt's own materials exist. And in the past, what we've seen in terms of critical examination of Hunt, it's always his designs. It's always Hunt the architect, Hunt the product, rather than how did we get here? So we will be taking our visitors on a journey through, just to simplify it, the people, places, and things that really formed him. And along the way, how we can start seeing some of these important milestones and individuals and objects in his work. So the collection brings together artwork by him, by his brother, by his sister, materials from his New York workshop at the 10th Street studio, examples of his, again, scrapbooks where he collected everything from images of architecture to images of historical costumes and portraiture. How costume gets, involved in Hunt's architecture still haven't quite cracked that riddle yet, but you can start to see how this accumulation of knowledge forms his own architectural drawings, which we will have ample samples of, original drawings from the Library of Congress, to again showcase how all of this is coming together. And then I'll just leave the carrot dangling that the final exhibition space is really immersive, and it's two specific spaces that Hunt was involved with the design of, and how you can see all of that in physical form rather than just in these inspirational drawings turned into renderings for potential construction to actual space.
Anything related to his extensive travels?
Absolutely. We have a section dedicated to that. We will be looking at this incredible map that he took as a journey, beginning in Paris, moving south through Italy, to North Africa, back through the Middle East, and back to Europe. There wasn't just one expedition of travel for Hunt. He was constantly, not even on the road, on the water, traveling also back and forth between North America and Europe. And he really is documenting so much of this, so we can see and follow this pathway for him. It also is interesting to see how this travel is staged at different parts of his life. So travel by way of education, travel by way of marriage, travel by way of general family dynamics. So again, in those various stages of travel and development, it is affecting the work that's produced by him and eventually his studio, in so much that he must have influenced his children to go into architecture. His son, Richard Howland Hunt, ends up joining the firm in the 1890s after a stint at the École des Beaux-Arts too. So it's really an incredible journey that he's going to take all of us on as a part of this exhibition experience.
So the three houses where the listeners can see Hunt's work, and there are more, the three houses of the Preservation Society are the Breakers, Marble House, and Chateau-sur-Mer. And Marble House, well, Chateau-sur-Mer was his first when he did a revamp of that 1850 building. And he did that, I guess, in the 1870s. Then he went on to Marble House, then he went on to the Breakers. Can you tell us any examples in any of those three houses that would be recognizable to just anyone listening of what he might have taken from his travels? Something from the Arab world, whatever.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. So most prominently, if you were ever driving through the front gates of Chateau-sur-Mer, you're going to see these very sturdy, strong entrance gates that are completely flat, devoid of any sort of ornament, with the exception of the family's falcon that has been carved into the surface of it. That is directly taking from Egyptian design and concept.
You mean
That
the falcon? He designed the falcon?
He didn't design the falcon, but the actual structure
Oh,
of
I
the
see.
entrance gates are derived from Egyptian design. And that transitions even into part of the porte cochere that gets added by Hunt at Chateau-sur-Mer. Moving in through that space in general, you're also going to see a huge inspiration of Italian Renaissance, with Hunt bringing in Luigi Ferlini to do 2 rooms at Chateau-sur-Mer, combined with intermittent spaces of English arts and crafts. So it really is this, again, Beaux-Arts idea of combining these different historical and contemporary ideas. Marble House, even though it just screams French from floor to ceiling, there are some concepts that show it's not just one particular era of French architecture that he's looking to emulate. There are a variety of different 18th century styles that get incorporated, and of course, also, the 19th century take on grand Beaux-Arts architecture. Think about the monumental mantelpiece and horological clock that's in the Gold Salon. That is Hunt at his best, working with Jules Lillard, bringing together all of these different ideas in one space. And in the next room over, a completely different Gothic revival room, totally different time periods, but somehow seamlessly blended together as as 2 spaces you can experience, one right after the other. And the Breakers it's again a pastiche of Italian design mixed with classical French design, and in some cases we're even seeing some derivatives of the Adams-esque influence taken from Italian Palladian architecture in some of the rooms. So it's not any one particular element being copied. It's this great synthesis of elements being brought together, and that's what separates Hunt from the rest.
Right. So he was in Europe for 10 years or more. He came back to the United States. What did he find when he arrived back in New York, where he set up his architectural practice? And how was it different? New York as an American city, different from the American and the European capitals that he was accustomed to?
Yeah, well, I think Paris is the best comparison between Hunt's experience, Paris and New York. So while Hunt was beginning his studies at the École, you had King Louis Philippe being transitioned out of his role, and Emperor Napoleon III being transitioned in as part of a political revolution. And they had both brought on Georges Eugene Haussmann to redesign Paris from a medieval city to this capital of grand boulevards and cultural institutions and unified architecture to help basically define what France was in a growing global society. This is happening concurrently with the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. So you get to New York, and New York is, especially Manhattan, it is a series of brownstones and these factories that are going up. And again,
and tenements, many tenements.
Yes, it has a huge influx of immigration happening too. And it is what we've traditionally called this great melting pot of societies and cultures. And Hunt is part of a group of incredibly privileged people who want to define what culture is for the US. They're not satisfied with this sort of quilt of different ideas coming together. They want something that feels more structured. And one of the ways to do that is through the expansion of the city that's happening at a rapid pace. That does get stalled with the Civil War that takes place during this period. Hunt's actually able to leave the country, so he doesn't have to serve in that capacity. He's also continuing commissions in New York, but America's really struggling to find who it is. New York is rapidly growing as the largest city in the country, and so that opportunity, met with Hunt's talent and ambition, really becomes this perfect position in history for grand new architectural forms to be brought up. I'm thinking of the Vanderbilt 660 Fifth Avenue. That was Hunt's first commission with the Vanderbilt family. And it sets the stage for the rest of, New York's Gilded Age architectural movement. It's these grand, historically based buildings that are being developed, not just for, personal private residences, but also for, office buildings and civic commissions. So it's trying to create a landscape rather than, a block by block construction plan.
And speaking of landscapes writ large, what kind of impact do you think he had and his teachings had in terms of the cultural landscape of the country? I think you're touching on that now. So he was really part of the transformation of an American city from what it shouldn't be to what it could be, I guess, is a way of putting it. I mean, he really had a broad influence. So how would you define that?
Well, that goes even into cultural institutions. Hunt in 1870 was part of a group of, I believe it was 28 people, 28 men in New York, who incorporated the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So it wasn't just about the streetscapes and what you were seeing as you were walking down or coming down in your carriage or on your horse. It was also destinations where you could experience culture firsthand. And the museum concept at that time was pretty revolutionary in the US. Galleries and collections were largely private. They were clubs for intellectuals. They were libraries for references of scholars rather than open to anyone. It was also, again, this teaching vehicle to help educate the masses about what culture and good taste is. So it served a whole host of purposes, but the Met really is, the Met cannot be discounted as nothing more than one of the most incredible turning points in great public education on arts and culture. And Hunt served on the architectural committee there. He helped with the acquisition of a series of objects. He donated a whole host of his own personal collections to the Met. Architectural models, plaster casts, and his influence was so great in that respect that while he had designed a new facade for the Fifth Avenue building as it was expanding, that was never put in place while he was alive. So when he dies in 1895, it's never realized. By 1902, the Metropolitan Museum of Art makes a decree that posthumously they're going to honor Hunt's design, and they hire his two sons, Richard and now Joseph Howland Hunt, to finish that project and that work. So when you see this wonderful, incredible Beaux-Arts facade of the Met on Fifth Avenue, that is Richard Morris Hunt. The Met, in so many ways, is Richard Morris Hunt.
Yeah. Well, we like to think that the Breakers is Richard Morris Hunt.
Absolutely, yeah. The Breakers, I think, is Richard Morris Hunt at his peak of serving the client's interest.
Right, yeah.
Not only is it one of the most extraordinary private spaces in the world, particularly at the time that it's being built, it also is positioned so beautifully against this rugged natural landscape, built natural land, or excuse me, not built, but this natural landscape that creates this incredible contrast. It is an even greater experience to understand Hunt's genius because it still exists in the context that he intended it for, whereas the Met has changed so dramatically based on how the city developed around it.
What are some of the Richard Morris Hunt buildings that you think our audience would recognize, not just in Newport, we've mentioned them, but outside of Newport, whether it's Boston, whether it's New York, whether it's Chicago, whether it's wherever?
So the only Boston surviving commission that I know of is Martin Brimmer's house, which is now a private club in Boston's Back Bay. So the Brimmer residence was a two-part townhouse that's now been transitioned to a private club. So it can't.
Which club is it? Do you?
I'm now forgetting what the name of it is.
I can't remember either.
But it also has had quite a lot of its architectural facade changed over the years. In Newport, I would also say the Griswold House, the Newport Art Museum, is really, really important. It's one of his first commissions in Newport as a full house project. It's been beautifully maintained on the exterior. So it also demonstrates, I think, by comparison to places like Marble House, just the breadth of his capacity to be able to design in one way and then also design in a completely different way based on, again, client perspective. There's this great quote of his that I'm going to paraphrase it's like, you have to remember you're spending your client's money. If they want you to design the house around a chimney that's upside down, you do it. So that really is Richard Morris Hunt to a T. In New York, you know, of the 250 commissions that he had, so few of them still exist, particularly in the way that they had been originally designed. So the Met is really, if you have the opportunity to stand on the opposite side of Fifth Avenue and look back at it, just start to trace the lines, and you're going to see so much of the breakers, so much of Marble House in that space, based on, again, what he found to be these incredibly important principles of design and aesthetics.
You're touching on so many things, but I am very curious to know a little bit about his personality. What kind of man, apart from being well-bred and genius across the board, was he a nice person? Was he sociable? Was he shy? Was he cranky? Did he have hobbies? Or I want to know more about him, because I think some of the show will talk about this.
Definitely. I think.
And was he popular in Newport? And was he well accepted? And did he have a crowd of friends when he was here?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we want the dirt.
Well, that's exactly, again, the point of the exhibition too, is to frame him as a person. So I'll start from like a social perspective. So we know, was a member of what was called the Newport Town and Country Club, which was created by Julia Ward Howe. And it was an intellectual society of people that would come together for discussions and lectures. They had guests like Mark Twain. They also had, and I'm forgetting the name of the woman, but she's who the governess is based off of in The King and I. She was the governess to the children of the King of Siam. So it drew these incredible figures from 19th century popular culture, not to mention science and literature and a whole host of different ideas and topics. So he was very involved in the Town and Country Club. He was also a member of the Newport Reading Room, which was, a very society-driven type of social network. So Hunt bridged these two networks while he was in Newport. And what we know about his time here in particular was that he really enjoyed spending it with his friends, which we count among most of the members at both of these clubs. He loved Newport so much he decided to be buried here, even though it wasn't where he was from or where his primary residence was. So I think that says a lot.
Tell us where he was buried, which
He's buried
cemetery?
at Island Cemetery
Right.
next to his wife, Catherine, and they are hard to find because they are less ornate than you might expect. And Lou and Trudy Coxe from the Newport Cemetery Commission are going to be giving tours of Island Cemetery, running concurrently with the exhibition, specifically looking at Hunt-related people as well as Hunt himself. So be sure to keep an eye out for those tours. But as a person, he's documented as incredibly ambitious, but incredibly kind. Really beloved amongst the people that knew him well. We know that upon his death in 1895, the Biltmore is being built in North Carolina, and a day later.
And he is the architect?
And he is the architect, yes. And a day later, the group of tradesmen who are working at Biltmore and get the news have this incredibly beautiful calligraphy written sort of declaration made for Hunt that says that the world has lost its greatest architect, and that, and paraphrasing here, that we are, tradesmen in particular, are indebted to Hunt for elevating their craft and their practice. And that's again a representative of the spectrum that Hunt touched. It wasn't just that he was delivering these great designs for his clients. He was educating the next generation of architects, formalizing that career path in general, but then also finding and bringing on these very sorted groups of artisans and craftspeople to work on these houses. and elevating them as true artists, not just, quote unquote
Workers.
construction workers. Think about
Right.
Carl Bitter and all of his sculptural stone carving at the breakers. He's truly taking architecture and making it into an art form. And again, that this wide circle of individuals who are so indebted to him for that. Not only is Hunt buried here, but there is also a permanent memorial erected for him on Fifth Avenue, directly across from the Frick Museum now. And it was developed for recognition of his contributions to about a dozen different societies and professional organizations that he helped found, and has incredibly beautiful sculptures by Augustus St. Gaudens on them as well. So it's his touch was so widespread that people enjoyed working with him. And if you think about just the Vanderbilts in general, a network of three in particular brothers hired the same architect. They could
Right.
only have said nice things about him. So I think that speaks volumes.
Well, and how did he get along well with other architects? Were they his pals, or was he competing so that he was trying to block them out all the time?
From what we understand, there wasn't a sense of competition as a part of this. You have William Mead of McKim, Mead and White also referencing how Hunt was an inspiration for him. He's working very closely with H.H. Richardson. And in fact, after Richardson dies, he takes on some of his commissions, including one here in Newport. I think that he was trying to uplift the profession, and every architect of the period would benefit from that, not only just in terms of how they'd be viewed within society, but I think it also helped in pay and also having value in what they were able to offer as a service. And just overall showing people and demonstrating that this was far more than lines on a piece of paper. It was the construction of these incredibly large and ornate buildings for both public and private use. So,
Well, talk a little bit, because I think it's an amusing story, his relationship with the woman who built Marble House, Alva Vanderbilt Belmont. He had to have been a person who was able to listen well and get along, because everything that we know says that was not an easy partnership.
right. Well, and what we have as primary resource documentation is really from Alva's unpublished memoirs, which are in the Duke University library collection for some reason. But Alva talks about it being a true partnership. She had spent a lot of her formative years in France also. After her family had lost everything in the Civil War, they moved to Paris. And so she knew what she wanted to bring through this Marble House Commission, particularly after the success of their collaboration on 660 Fifth Avenue in New York. So from my understanding through Alva's written perspective, because we don't have Hunt's perspective, they were tirelessly working together on fixing these very small details about the selection of materials and how they'd be imported, about using Jules Allard as this incredible interior designer who would have reported to Hunt and not to Alva. So there's so much influence in that house between the two of them, so much so that we now know too, in the develop of that Gothic room that we had referenced earlier, there was this incredible collection of Gothic and medieval art that Alva had collected from Emile Gavet, who was a well-known Parisian collector and dealer. We now know that it was Hunt who introduced Alva to Gavet, and it was likely for the purpose of this project. So it doesn't just extend to him having multiple versions of floor plans being changed because Alva didn't like things. It was because they were trying to fit things into these spaces as well to accommodate it as not just a house, but as she also referred to it as her temple dedicated to the arts. So there really is this incredible relationship that, again, only from her perspective, she really loved the project. She alludes to the fact that she may have been a difficult client. I'm sure if, as professional as Hunt was, he would have probably said it was a wonderful experience. So he was just as good at creating these incredible designs as he was as managing personalities.
Well, is it correct that there's a line that somebody once said that he said, well, I may be the architect, but Alva calls the shots.
Yeah.
Something like that, which
Yeah.
actually, when you think of architect and client, that's not an unusual line,
Yeah.
but maybe the way it was said had emphasis.
Well, and it may be the fact that it was a woman who was so, intimately involved in this process. For that period, the great tastemakers publicly referenced weren't women necessarily. They were mostly men. So the fact that it was Alva's project, I think also speaks to what may have been looked at as an extraordinary outcome for the Gilded Age.
What was the house that sort of launched him, or building that launched him in the direction of, and how did he get connected so well to the Gilded Age titans of industry of the period?
I mean, I would say one of the most pivotal structures that he created at the beginning of his career was the 10th Street Studio. It was the first dedicated space for artists in New York City, and he had his own workshop there. So he's then also circulating with, this incredible group of individuals who are well off as professional artists, because you needed to be. You'd be a very struggling artist in the Gilded Age if you came from nothing. So he's not only circulating with those individuals, he has influential references made for him by Le Fluel from Paris to people in New York. And also his marriage to Catherine Howland was incredibly beneficial to him. So I'd say it's probably a quarter of his own very early marketing abilities for himself. And then 3/4 of networking, which is still lies true today in terms of how people grow and succeed in their own careers. It's demonstrating talent, but also you have to know the right people.
Right. And how many children did they have?
They had 5 children.
And one of them became, or 2 of them became architects.
2 of them became architects. One of their sons went into finance. One of their daughters tragically died a month after, or 9 months after getting married, living in London. She died during childbirth, and I'm now forgetting what happened to the other daughter. But they certainly had a loving family relationship. They were written about in various periodicals and publications of the period for their social pursuits. They were highly respected and well regarded here in Newport. Their Newport home was where the Hotel Viking currently is. It was called Hilltop Cottage. And in fact, that house was actually first owned by William Morris Hunt, Richard's brother, and then Richard ended up buying it from him and creating another architectural studio here in Newport. So
And tell us about his death here in Newport.
Yeah,
Or
so
no, he was traveling. He was traveling.
He was traveling.
He had left Newport.
He had left Newport. He was on his return home, and he was not a well man for a lot of his life. Some of his travels were actually prompted also by seeking refuge in fresh springs and better climates. Nothing specifically diagnosed from contemporary medical terminology about what he may have suffered from. I would assume stress had a lot to do with it too. How he traveled back and forth from Asheville, North Carolina to New York City to Newport in 1894 and 95, I still can't fathom, although I'm sure he had people on the job doing things for him. But no, he passes away. It is a shock to the family, and it is met with international mourning. And again, there are
And the breakers the Biltmore was not finished yet, so he
Right.
did not get to see the fruit of all his labor.
right.
And he died in 1895. So did he see the breakers finished, or was it just the final stages?
Well, both houses were technically opened in 1895, the breakers in July and Biltmore in December. So in terms of facade, that had been
Oh.
realized, but
Okay.
his son Richard continues on in finishing up whatever the details are of those projects. So finished is also one of those terms that we like to, just blanketly say so that people think of it as being done, but in great, reality, as we well know, it's the job's
Yeah.
still not done in 2025.
Yeah. We don't have much time, but maybe some of the best objects that people will see when they come to the exhibition, which opens on the 30th of May.
Yeah. Hard. It's like picking your favorite child. That's hard. But I think what's really remarkable is that this is the largest collection of Richard Morris Hunt materials leaving the Library of Congress for the first time. So we're incredibly grateful to them for the scrapbooks, the sketchbooks, the drawings, and the personal materials that are coming. We will also have a wonderful wedding diary or honeymoon diary from his travels with his wife, Catherine, after they've been married in 1861. Probably my favorite piece, just because it's so quirky and fun. We have a plaster cast coming, which is of life size, Richard Morris Hunt dressed as a stonemason that was put atop the roofline of 660 Fifth Avenue, the home of William and Alva Vanderbilt in New York. This was a surprise to Hunt by the stonemasons from the project. So again, showing that reverence and respect for his
How
experience.
did the family feel?
They must have loved it because it stayed. And he loved this likeness so much that he had his book plate made of the same likeness. So it's just one of those things that sort of ties all these great narratives together about how he was respected by client and tradespeople, and as an incredible legacy that we're so excited to discuss and share with the public.
And you've done a very good job connecting with other partners for this exhibition. Tell us who some of the people are or entities you've been working with.
Well, primarily Mari Nakahara from the Library of Congress. She's the curator of prints and drawings. She has been an incredible resource for us. Again, also the curatorial staff and the director at the Bennington Art Museum, the Vermont Historical Society, the National Park Service, the Longfellow House, the Newport Historical Society, the Newport Art Museum, the Redwood Library, all great local partners too that have just lent so much great knowledge and will be lending materials to the exhibition. So it really is a group effort in terms of the final result. And also a shout out to one of our incredible research fellows, Teo Lorenzo, who's here for 1 year from Paris, who's been assisting with this project. He's been an absolute wealth of knowledge and an incredible organizational force. And then Catherine Moran, who also is on our team and is a scholar of Hunt and has contributed a whole host of great insight and information to this show.
And you are, we have 1 minute left. One last pitch about Richard Morris Hunt as an architect and as a man.
The greatest mind of the Gilded Age, and we're bringing the public that mind through a personal, intimate perspective, not just through the buildings that he created. So you'll get to know him in a way that you haven't been able to know him before, and we hope that you visit it over and over again and see new things in a way that you can also then take to our other properties.
So we are in the final days of putting this exhibition together, and Leslie is not going to get any sleep. So it's best to let her go now and thank her very much. We're all very much looking forward to this exhibition, first of its kind anywhere. It happens in Newport. And Richard Morris Hunt's presence is so strong here that I hope everybody who is listening will come and take a visit. And the show closes when, Leslie?
Sunday, November 2nd.
So it's here from May 30th to November 2nd. So thank you very much, Leslie Jones.
Thank you, Trudy. Thank you so much.
Curator and Director of Museum Affairs at the Preservation Society of Newport County.